The Channel 7 news van arrived at 5:30 p.m., followed by what could only be described as a media feeding frenzy. Karen stood in her backyard, freshly showered and dressed in her best, reasonable suburban mom outfit. A floral sundress that screamed, "I'm not crazy, I'm just fed up." "I'm here with Karen Blackwood," Jennifer Morrison announced to the camera, who has turned her driveway into a swimming pool in what she calls a protest against her homeowners association's overreach. "Karen, tell us what drove you to this dramatic action." Karen had practiced this moment in her head, but standing here with cameras rolling, she felt the weight of every frustration she'd swallowed over the past 3 years. "Jennifer, I've been fined for having the wrong color mailbox. I've been written up for my garden gnomes. Last month, they fined me $500 for parking on the street during my daughter's birthday party. I realized I was living in a dictatorship, not a neighborhood. But isn't this a bit extreme?" "What's extreme?" Karen said, her voice gaining strength. "Is paying someone to make your life miserable. I pay HOA fees to maintain common areas, not to have my flowers policed by people with too much time on their hands." The interview was interrupted by Richard Hartley's appearance, flanked by 2 other board members. Karen recognized them. Tom Webster, the treasurer who'd once fined her for having her garbage can visible from the street, and Patricia Vance, the secretary who'd written her up for having an unauthorized wreath on her door in March. "This is a publicity stunt," Richard declared, his voice carrying across the gathering crowd. "Mrs. Blackwood is trying to embarrass our community to avoid accountability." "Accountability for what?" Karen shot back. "Following rules that don't exist in writing?" "Richard, you've been making up regulations for years. Show me where it says I can't have a pool in my driveway." The crowd, now numbering at least 40 neighbors and growing, murmured with interest. Karen noticed some faces she recognized. The Johnsons, who'd been fined for their Halloween decorations being up too long. The Patel family, who'd received warnings about their ethnic garden choices. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd been told her Puerto Rican flag was inappropriate. "The bylaws clearly state," Richard began. "The bylaws state nothing about driveway pools," Karen interrupted. "I've read them 17 times. Have you?" The cameras caught Richard's pause, the momentary uncertainty that flickered across his face. "The board has broad authority to maintain community standards." "Show me the written standard," Karen pressed. "Show me the specific rule I'm breaking." "This is ridiculous," Patricia Vance interjected. "You're creating a scene to avoid taking responsibility for your actions." "My actions?" Karen felt something snap inside her chest. "My actions are putting water in my own driveway. Your actions are collecting money to harass people over flower choices. Which one of us is the problem here?" A voice from the crowd called out. "Tell them about the Christmas lights, Karen." Karen turned toward the voice. It was Jim Patterson, whose elaborate holiday display had been deemed excessive last December. Suddenly, she realized she wasn't alone in this fight. "The Christmas lights are a perfect example," she said, addressing the cameras. "The HOA has a rule about reasonable holiday decorations. But reasonable according to whom?" Richard decided Jim's lights were too bright, so he fined him. But Mrs. Chen's beautiful Chinese New Year display? Also fined. The Johnsons' Halloween decorations? Fined. Anyone seeing a pattern here? More voices joined from the crowd. The Patel Garden situation. The Martinez family's complaint about noise restrictions that somehow only apply to their children. The Williams fine for having their garage door open during the day. Jennifer Morrison's eyes lit up. This was turning into a much bigger story than a simple HOA dispute. "It sounds like you're not the only one with concerns about your homeowners association," she said. "I'm not," Karen said firmly. "I'm just the first one to stop being afraid of them." As the interview wrapped up, Karen noticed something that made her smile. At least 6 neighbors had quietly approached Dave, asking for copies of the HOA bylaws. The revolution was spreading. But as the news van pulled away, Richard Hartley was already on his phone, and Karen could guess exactly who he was calling. The board meeting was still 3 hours away, but the real battle was just beginning. 3 weeks later, Karen floated in her driveway pool, reading the morning newspaper's follow-up story about the Willowbrook pool revolution. The article mentioned that similar HOA disputes had erupted in 4 other communities across the state, with residents citing her case as inspiration. "Morning, Karen," called out Mrs. Chen, walking her dog past the pool. "How's the water today?" "Perfect as always," Karen replied, no longer surprised by the friendly greetings. The neighborhood had transformed in ways she'd never expected. Without the constant threat of fines and harassment, people seemed more relaxed, more willing to actually talk to each other. The new HOA board, led by Mrs. Rodriguez as president, had spent their first meeting systematically reviewing and eliminating the dozen made-up rules that had caused so much conflict. They'd also voted to refund the past year's worth of aesthetic violations fines, which had resulted in over $12,000 being returned to residents. "You know you're going to have to drain that thing eventually," Dave said, emerging from the garage with his coffee. "Winter's coming." "I know," Karen said, but she was smiling. "I was thinking of getting a hot tub for the winter months." "Karen," Dave's tone held a warning. "What? The bylaws don't mention hot tubs either." Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Mom, there's a woman on TikTok who put a pool in her driveway and credited you as inspiration. You're going viral." Karen laughed, setting her phone aside. She'd never wanted to be famous, but she was discovering that standing up for yourself had unexpected consequences. The morning piece was interrupted by a black sedan pulling up to the curb. Karen watched as a man in an expensive suit emerged, followed by someone with a camera. Her relaxed mood evaporated as she recognized the man, Richard Hartley's brother, who happened to be a local real estate developer. "Mrs. Blackwood," the man called out. "I'm Stephen Hartley. I wonder if I could have a word." Karen remained in her pool, but her posture shifted to alert. "About what?" "About the future of Willowbrook Estates. You see, there's been some interest in developing this area, and your little rebellion has complicated things." The cameraman was filming everything. Karen realized this wasn't a casual conversation. It was a setup. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said carefully. "Property values, Mrs. Blackwood, community standards, the kind of stability that families look for when they invest in a neighborhood. Your actions have raised questions about whether Willowbrook Estates is still a desirable place to live." Karen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the pool water. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm offering you a solution," Stephen said smoothly. "My company is prepared to make generous offers to residents who might be interested in relocating. Fresh start, new neighborhood, maybe something with a real pool. And if we're not interested in relocating?" Stephen's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, that would be unfortunate. You see, change is coming to this area, whether you want it or not. The question is whether you'll be part of the solution or part of the problem." Karen climbed out of the pool, water dripping from her swimsuit, but her voice was steady. "I think you should leave now." "Of course. But Mrs. Blackwood, think carefully about what you really want to fight for. Sometimes winning one battle means losing the war." As the sedan drove away, Karen stood in her driveway, suddenly aware that her pool revolution had attracted attention from forces much larger than a petty HOA board. The real fight, she realized, was just beginning. She looked at her phone, then at the houses around her where families were just starting their days, unaware that their neighborhood had just become a battleground for something much bigger than community standards. Karen Blackwood had started a revolution with a pool in her driveway. Now she had to figure out how to finish it. The Willowbrook Estates Community Center had never seen a crowd like this. Karen arrived at 6:55 p.m. to find every seat filled and people standing along the walls. The usual board meetings attracted maybe 8 residents. Tonight, she counted at least 60. Richard Hartley sat at the head table, flanked by his fellow board members, all of whom wore expressions of barely contained panic. They clearly expected a quiet disciplinary hearing, not a community uprising. "This emergency meeting is called to order," Richard announced, his voice strained. "We're here to address the flagrant violation of community standards by Karen Blackwood." Karen stood up from her seat in the front row. "Point of order," she said calmly. "Which specific standard am I violating?" You know perfectly well. I know the bylaws, Richard, chapter and verse. But I'm asking you to state, for the record, which written rule I've broken. The room fell silent. Richard shuffled through his papers, his confidence visibly wavering. The General Maintenance and Aesthetic Standards. Section 4.2 covers aesthetic standards for permanent landscaping modifications. Karen said, pulling out her own copy of the bylaws. My pool is temporary and removable. Section 6.2 covers pools in backyards. Section 7.3 covers driveways and requires they remain functional for vehicle access. My driveway is still perfectly functional. I just chose not to park there today. This is semantic nonsense. Patricia Vance burst out. You're making a mockery of our community. No, said a voice from the back of the room. Karen turned to see Mrs. Rodriguez standing up. The mockery is what you've done to this neighborhood. My family has lived here for 8 years, and we've never been fined as much as we have in the past 2. More voices joined in. The Patels talked about being told their garden was too ethnic. The Johnsons described being fined for decorations that weren't even mentioned in the bylaws. The Williams family revealed they'd been considering moving rather than continuing to deal with the harassment. Order. Richard pounded his gavel. This is not a general complaint session. Actually, Karen said, according to Robert's Rules of Order, which our bylaws require us to follow, residents have the right to address concerns during board meetings. You're not running this meeting. No, but I am following the rules, Karen replied. Unlike some people. The room erupted in murmurs and scattered applause. Karen felt the energy shift. This wasn't just about her pool anymore. It was about 3 years of accumulated frustration, of residents who'd been afraid to speak up individually, but found courage in numbers. I move for a vote of no confidence in the current board, called out Jim Patterson. Seconded, shouted Mrs. Rodriguez. You can't do that, Richard sputtered. Actually, said a new voice, they can. Everyone turned to see a woman in a business suit standing by the door. I'm Angela Martinez, attorney with Henderson and Associates. Mrs. Blackwood asked me to review your community bylaws. Karen felt a surge of satisfaction. She'd called Angela that afternoon, after realizing the board meeting was going to be a setup. According to your governing documents, Angela continued, residents can call for board elections with a petition signed by 20% of homeowners. I count at least that many people in this room. This is insane, Richard said, his voice rising. Over a pool in a driveway. It's not about the pool, Karen said, standing to face him. It's about the fact that you've been making up rules for years, targeting families who don't fit your vision of the perfect neighborhood. It's about the fact that you've turned community standards into personal vendettas. You're destroying property values. I'm exercising my rights as a homeowner, Karen shot back. Rights that you've been systematically trying to eliminate. The vote was swift and decisive. By 8:30 p.m., the entire board had been replaced by a group of residents who'd never wanted to be involved in HOA politics, but were tired of being bullied by those who did. As the meeting disbanded, Karen found herself surrounded by neighbors offering congratulations and thanks. But it was Richard Hartley's parting words that stuck with her. This isn't over, Karen. You have no idea what you've started. By 9 a.m., Karen's driveway had become the neighborhood's most popular tourist attraction. She counted at least 12 people who had found reasons to walk their dogs, check their mailboxes, or suddenly develop urgent needs for outdoor exercise, all while stealing glances at her poolside paradise. The official response came at 9:23 a.m. in the form of Richard Hartley himself, striding across the street with the purposeful gait of a man who'd built his entire identity around maintaining property values. His wife Brenda followed 2 steps behind, clutching a leather-bound copy of the HOA bylaws like a shield. Karen. Richard's voice carried the weight of moral authority and barely contained fury. What is the meaning of this? Karen looked up from her book, shielding her eyes from the sun with one hand. Oh, hi, Richard. I'm just reading by my pool. Isn't it gorgeous? The kids from Amazon Prime really outdid themselves with the delivery. This is completely unacceptable, Brenda interjected, her voice trembling with indignation. You're destroying the character of our neighborhood. Actually, Karen said, marking her page with a deliberate slowness that made Richard's left eye twitch, I've been researching our community standards very carefully. Section 4.7 prohibits permanent structures that alter the landscape. This is completely temporary. And Section 6.2 covers pools in backyards. But there's nothing about driveways. Richard's face was reaching dangerous levels of red. You're being deliberately obtuse. The spirit of the law. The spirit of the law. Karen interrupted, her voice taking on a sharp edge. Seems to be making everyone miserable while you collect your little power trips. But the letter of the law? That's on my side. We'll see about that, Richard snapped. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tonight, 7 o'clock, and I strongly suggest you drain that monstrosity before then. I'll be there, Karen said pleasantly. Should I bring my swimsuit? After Richard and Brenda stormed off, Dave approached with fresh ice for Karen's cooler. You know they're going to try to fine you into oblivion. Let them try. Karen's voice was calm, but her hands were steady as she poured herself a glass of lemonade. I've got lawyer money saved up, and more importantly, I've got something they don't. What's that? I've actually read the bylaws. All of them. The amendments, the addendums, the meeting minutes from 2019 when they tried to ban political signs. They've been flying by the seat of their pants for years, making up rules as they go. But this time, they messed with the wrong soccer mom. The afternoon brought a parade of visitors. Some were hostile, like Mr. Kowalski, who lectured her about property values while his unleashed dog left presents on her lawn. Others were curious, like teenage Emma Chen, who asked thoughtful questions about the legal implications while secretly admiring Karen's boldness. But it was the unexpected supporter who changed everything. At 4 p.m., while Karen was doing actual laps in her driveway pool, a woman she'd never seen before approached from the street. "Excuse me," the woman said. "I'm Jennifer Morrison from Channel 7 News. I received a tip about your situation here. Would you be willing to do an interview?" Karen treaded water, considering. This was the moment of no return. Once the media got involved, there would be no quiet resolution, no diplomatic retreat. "Absolutely," she said, swimming to the pool's edge. "But I'll need 20 minutes to make myself presentable." "Of course," Jennifer said, her smile growing wider. "This is exactly the kind of story our viewers love." As Karen climbed out of the pool, she caught sight of Richard Hartley peering through his front window, his expression one of pure horror. She waved at him cheerfully, droplets of water catching the afternoon sun like tiny diamonds. The war was officially on. Karen Blackwood stood in her bathrobe at 6:47 a.m., garden hose in hand, watching her driveway transform into something that would make her neighbor's head spin. The concrete was already covered with a massive blue top, and she'd spent the better part of the night inflating the largest above-ground pool she could find online, a 24-foot monstrosity that now dominated her entire driveway. "This is insane," muttered her husband Dave from the garage doorway, clutching his coffee mug like a lifeline. "The HOA is going to lose their minds." Karen's lips curved into a smile that could have launched 1,000 lawsuits. That's exactly the point. The truth was, Karen had been planning this moment for 3 years. 3 years of watching the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association nitpick every blade of grass, every flower choice, every minor deviation from their precious community standards. 3 years of fines for her mailbox being the wrong shade of beige, warnings about her garden gnomes being aesthetically disruptive, and the final straw, a $500 fine for parking her car on the street for 2 hours during her daughter's birthday party. "Karen, honey, think about this," Dave pleaded, but she was already turning on the hose. The water began filling the pool with a satisfying gurgle. "I've been thinking about this for months," she replied, adjusting the poolside umbrella she positioned right where her Honda Civic usually sat. "Did you know there's nothing in the HOA bylaws specifically prohibiting pools in driveways?" I checked. Twice. By 7:15 a.m., the first neighbor had appeared. Mrs. Peterson from across the street stood at the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn, mouth agape, still in her pink fuzzy slippers. Her prized roses seemed to droop in shame at the spectacle. "Karen," Mrs. Peterson called out, her voice carrying that particular pitch reserved for genuine scandals. "What on earth are you doing?" Karen waved cheerfully from where she was setting up a beach chair. "Just enjoying my property rights, Helen. Beautiful morning, isn't it?" But that's a pool. In your driveway." "Sure is." Karen began applying sunscreen with theatrical enthusiasm. "Want to join me? The water's lovely." Helen Peterson's face cycled through approximately 7 different shades of red before she turned and marched back toward her house, her slippers slapping against the pavement with the urgency of someone about to make several very important phone calls. Dave emerged from the garage with a second coffee mug, his resignation evident in every step. "You know Richard Hartley's going to call an emergency board meeting." "I'm counting on it," Karen said, settling into her chair with a satisfied sigh. "In fact, I'd be disappointed if he didn't." The pool filter hummed contentedly as Karen opened her book, a legal thriller she'd been saving for this exact moment. Around her, the perfectly ordered world of Willowbrook Estates continued its morning routine, but she could feel the ripples of chaos beginning to spread. Her phone buzzed. A text from her daughter Emma. "Mom, Mrs. Chen just called me. She says there's a pool in your driveway. Please tell me you're not having a midlife crisis." Karen typed back, "Not a crisis, sweetheart. A revolution."